Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name's Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and evolution.
I'm Dr. Ross Barnett, paleogeneticist, mainly interested in ancient DNA and the Ice Age.
And today we're reviewing often requested, at least amongst my own friends and the people that I speak to in person, an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation from 1993, Season 6, Episode 20, The Chase. Kim, did you tell me last week that you'd never seen Star Trek The Next Generation?
No, I remember my dad and my sister used to watch it in the 90s, and I never sat down and watched it with them. It was so boring.
Did you just say, you nerds, I'm not watching that?
It just seemed like an adult show, and I wasn't quite there yet.
Okay, that's very diplomatic.
Ross, what about you?
Yeah, I remember watching the occasional episode in the 90s as a teen. It was very much in my wheelhouse. I mean, I was more of a Star Wars nerd, but I wasn't... I would take any sci-fi going pretty much, so I did tune in to Star Trek occasionally. And yeah, it was really nostalgic watching it again. Yeah, really tapped into that 90s nostalgia, and I was impressed by it, how good it was, how well acted, and Picard is such a great character.
Yes, it was enjoyable. It was slow paced, but I think that's, again, the difference in what our attention span nowadays.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is, I think, for a sort of networked TV show, it's quite cerebral. It is quite, there's some big themes in there. When you compare Kardashians then versus Kardashians now, there's definitely been a big change in the amount of intellectual heft that they bring to the table.
This is true. I think also one of the reasons why there's a difference in the how it feels slow. There's a lot of kind of slow scenes is because this used to be watched with commercial breaks.
Yeah.
And quite a few commercial breaks, being that it was a popular show. And so I think you forget that TV shows now aren't designed really to have those breaks in them. But back then they were, so you would sit down again after going to the washroom, getting a snack, and then it would ease you back into the show instead of just opening up into a fight scene or something again, right?
Yeah, and you can really see in how the kind of action is paced where the commercial breaks would have happened. I think I was quite lucky that in the UK it was shown on BBC Two, I think, and the BBC channels don't have commercials, so it was uninterrupted. But you could still, I remember even watching it in the 90s thinking, oh yeah, this is where they would cut to commercials, because the music kind of swells and then something happens and then it cuts away.
So who wants to summarize this episode and in the process explain why we're doing another futuristic sci-fi on our Stone Age archaeology podcast?
I can do it.
I feel bad that, Ross always does it, but this is such in his wheelhouse.
So it's called The Chase, which makes it sound like, a lot more action happens than it actually does. It's we get the classic Patrick Stewart voiceover at the beginning, which is very kind of dramatic and Shakespearean, where it's Stardate 46731.5 in his kind of Yorkshire tones. I mean, I don't understand Stardates. They seem to just choose a random number and stick it in. It's different from season to season. Anyway, so we're on the Enterprise. We have Picard being summoned to a room that's in the dark, and he walks in and he sees an artifact on the table, and he kind of says, "Is this a Kurlan Naskos?" Which obviously it is. I mean, anyone can see that as soon as it appears. But then the lights go up and we see Riker, William Frakes, the actor who also directed this episode, I find out from IMDb, who plays the number one on the Enterprise, is there with another character who's introduced as Professor Galen, who was Picard's teacher of classics and archaeology, I guess, when he was a younger man. And of course, Picard being Picard, he was the star pupil. And it's quite nice that Professor Galen calls him Mr. Picard all the way through, kind of referencing that when he was a student, he wasn't a captain. He hadn't even joined Starfleet. And so we get a little bit of kind of banter about this Krulin Naskos, which is like a sculptured ceramic bust. And Galen kind of asks Picard to date it, which is, the standard thing that archaeologists should be able to do, is sort of date an artifact from its appearance, from its structure, that kind of thing. And so Picard puts out a hasty guess and then is invited to look a bit closer. And he sort of expounds on this, that it's by the master of Tarquin Hill, who was a crafter 300 years ahead of his time. They never knew what his name was. And this reminded me a lot of discussions of things like Samian ware and Roman pottery, where different types are very collectible. There are various masters of the craft from 2,000 years ago that can be studied and identified even from small fragments. Anyway, so we find out that this artifact is about 12,000 years old. It reflects the Krullian civilization's idea that each individual is actually a community of individuals, which is, I guess, quite a resonant idea, that within us there are various voices that can come to the fore and back. And we see that the Naskos itself is a bust, but it opens up, and inside there's like a matryoshka. There's lots of smaller busts inside to represent this idea that inside each person there is a multitude. Anyway, so this is very expensive. We can discuss the ethics of selling archaeology at some point, probably. But Professor Galen is giving this priceless artifact to Picard, but he also has a request. He wants Picard to come on an expedition with him. He's very cryptic about it. Yes, Picard was his best pupil, but this must have been, 20, 30 years ago? And I guess now he has his own spaceship. That's pretty cool, and that could be useful. But we learn a bit more. Galen says he's going to stay for a few days. He wants Picard to come with him on this trip. It would take maybe 3 months to a year of field work. And they sit chatting it up. Picard interrogates Galen and say that his publications have been sporadic over the last decade. He hasn't been going to many symposia. That all kind of rings fairly true of senior archaeologists, whose output may not be more than a couple of papers a year, I guess. And we get a bit more of an insight into what's Galen up to. He talks about micropaleontology and how something big has happened. He won't tell Picard what he's going to be looking for unless he agrees to go with him, but it sounds like it's going to be big. There's going to be hazards and danger. He references something that Star Trek's actually always been very good at, is referencing real historical people and made up kind of historical people from our future but their past. So they talk about Schliemann, famously the excavator of Troy, and somebody made up who presumably in universe was a big deal. So Picard goes off to think about it, and he discusses it with his I don't quite remember, but I think she's his girlfriend or his, I don't know if they have such outdated concepts in the 24th century, but she's basically Dr. Crusher is his main lady. I don't think Picard ever spreads love among the galaxy as much as Kirk does. He seems to be fairly monogamous. But they have a nice discussion about how Galen was his kind of mentor, but also a kind of substitute father, somebody that understood him, and likewise Picard was a sort of substitute son for Galen, somebody that shared his interests and could talk about them with him. And so there's that kind of angle as well, that it's not just asking for help, but it's also a reconnection of a strong bond from the past, and how meeting certain people can also make you question the choices you made in your life. That maybe Picard could have become an archaeologist rather than a Starfleet captain, but he seems quite happy with the choices he's made. He doesn't want to leave the Enterprise. He doesn't want to give up his command for an archaeological jolly. Anyway, he comes to this decision with the help of discussions with Dr. Crusher, and meets up with Galen again, and says, I'm the captain of the ship. I can't leave it. I can't just disappear for a couple of months and then come back to it. That's not how the job works. But I'm happy with that. This is the choice that I've made, and I am glad of it. And then we see a sort of darker side to Galen. He kind of becomes a bit hubristic, calls Picard a dilettante.
Becomes a drama
queen.
total
drama queen, which, from the archaeologists that I've met, doesn't seem that out of character. They can be quite dramatic when they want to be. And he kind of storms out of the office and says, right, well, I'm not staying. I'm off now to do my secret archaeology. Goodbye, Captain Picard, said very sarcastically, whereas before he's been calling him Mr. Picard in a quite fatherly way. Anyway, so that's him off. Okay. But the Enterprise is on its way to how do they exactly describe it? An important delegation? No, symposium.
Yeah,
they're basically going to some high level bureaucracy on a distant planet, and and that's what they're going to do now that they've dropped Galen off. But then, about 5 seconds after he's left, they get a distress call from him. He is under attack by some Iridians, which is not great. So Picard obviously tries to rescue him. He gets Mr. Worf to send some tiny lasers at the Iridians, but for whatever reason, the Iridian ship has a kind of glass chin and just explodes instantly. And they beam Galen out of the wreckage back to the Enterprise. But he's taken the full brunt of the attack. And he's going to die. Dr. Crusher has no chance of saving him, but he does have time for some very poignant last words and says that he was too harsh on Picard, which is nice and dramatic. But this is crazy. What's been going on? Why did these Iridians want to destroy Professor Galen's research? What are they after? What's going on? There's a great line from Picard, which is that the conference can wait. Which was great. So they're not going to the conference. Screw the conference. They're going to do some chasing of this archaeologist, what he's been up to. So they know that Galen was going to a place called, I think, Rua 4, a planet. So they go there first of all, and when they get there, they discover that the planet is basically being cleansed. Like, it's every biological species on the planet is being destroyed. It's basically wiped clean. So that's intriguing. Something crazy is going on here. What are they going to do? They kind of go to Galen's shuttle and download all the stuff from his computer, and they find that the Iridians were trying to steal or take from Galen a kind of block of numbers, which is the sort of meat and two veg of the Star Trek universe, a crazy kind of number code that has to be deciphered. But it's only partial. They don't have all of it, and they can't figure out what these numbers mean. It could be anything. But they eventually managed to figure out that the numbers are DNA fragments from 19 different worlds, and that these DNA fragments are molecular algorithm. So they are parts of a computer program, essentially. And there's some exposition about how 4 billion years ago, this DNA must have been scattered over 19 different planets by some unknown higher beings, and that Galen has somehow stumbled upon this and is trying to put it all together. And so they know that there's parts of this algorithm missing, and they're trying to figure out where those bits are. And so there's an interesting thing where Picard asks how many non-Federation people are on the Enterprise, and if they can get DNA samples from them. So, as somebody who's been involved in DNA research, the ethics on that are quite interesting. Would you be able to force people to give up DNA samples just because they're under your command on your ship? I don't know. But they read some more. Interestingly, Picard manages to read all of Galen's published works in what seems like a day. So I guess, once you get tenure, you don't really have to produce much. Anyway.
A lot of people just repeat things over and over too in every paper.
Yeah. and cite themselves, etc., etc. Anyway, so my notes are a bit confused here, but I think they work out that they should be going to Lauren 3, which is where Galen had just been to, I think. And it's in the Curl system. Picard figures out that he was in the neighborhood. That's where he got this artifact that he gave to him at the beginning of the program. And so they should look for inhabited planets around the Curl system to see if that's where they picked up some of the missing fragments from this crazy DNA algorithm thing. So they go to this planet, and when they're there, they see, or they go prepared, because actually when they arrive, there's 2 Cardassian ships there, and there's also a Klingon warship which decloaks. And so these guys have been on the trail. They've intercepted Galen's message. They're doing the same thing as the Enterprise. They're trying to find the missing bits of this algorithm. And there's a nice kind of mini conference between Picard representing the humans, the kind of leader of the Cardassians, and the leader of the Klingons, where they decide, well, we're all after the same thing. We're all kind of want the same outcome, but we have to work together. The Enterprise will share the information that it has. If the Cardassians will share what they have, they've been to Lauren 3, which has some of the DNA signatures, and it turns out it was the Klingons that sterilized Indri 8, which was the planet that was getting kind of wiped clean, because they'd picked up a DNA sample and said, screw everyone else, and just decided to destroy everything. So the
Such
Klingons,
a weird mindset.
Yeah. The Klingons think that this algorithm will be the source of some kind of ultimate weapon, very much betraying their biases in the search for something unknown. The Cardassians think it will be a kind of unlimited power source. That's their kind of their assumptions coming to the fore as well. I don't think Picard ever voices what he thinks the algorithm will show, but there's still one piece missing.
The Cardassian lady said even like, well, it could be a recipe for biscuits.
Yeah.
And then the Klingon guy was like, well, if that's what you want, give me the DNA and I'll go home and send my mom's biscuit recipe. And I also really enjoyed the implication that through all of the different, species and worlds through the galaxy, that everybody has biscuits.
That's a universal.
It's like a universal thing.
currency.
Well, spoiler alert, this episode, out of every episode of Star Trek, out of every series, explains that kind of. So
yeah, we get to that, don't we?
This is true.
So there's like an easy truce between the Klingons, the Cardassians, and the Enterprise, where they use the Enterprise's computer to work out where the one missing bit of the algorithm is left. So they've used the computer to join the information that the Cardassians have, the Klingons have, and that the Enterprise have, but there's still a bit missing. So quite cleverly, they say, okay, well, these were seeded essentially on these planets. If we kind of use our computer to work out where they were positioned about 4 billion years ago, maybe we can find some kind of pattern which will tell us where to look for the missing piece. So that's going on. It's going to take a few hours. I thought that was quite good. When they sort of started talking about, oh, we just need to do this, this, and this, I thought, okay, well, they're going to do it instantly and then and go off and do it. But Dr. Crusher says, that'll take me a few hours to program. It's like, oh, okay. So that's feels fairly true to life. So while this is going on, the Klingon's wandering around. He meets with Data in a bar. Data, who's an android, who's been heard of in the Klingon Federation as being extremely strong and extremely smart. The Klingon guy wants to wrestle with him, essentially do some kind of Klingon arm wrestling, and Data beats him easily. And this is all lead up to a potential bribe, which Data sees through straight away. The Klingon wants Data to give him the missing piece of information first, in exchange for Data becoming like a high up in the Klingon Federation. But Data's very ethical and won't do that. And so the computer program that Crusher is set up is now kind of run through. They found where they think the missing piece of the algorithm, the DNA that's missing, would be, or at least that's what they say. And so first of all, they talk about the Rinazad system, and immediately the Cardassians kind of beam out of the Enterprise and go off there. but it's a red herring. It seems that they're not. I don't know. It's not really explained. I don't think how they or why they did a red herring. What was the point?
Geordi realized that someone had been messing with the ship's defenses, and that's how they figured out that the Cardassians had this scheme to immediately jump away and disable their ships.
Right.
So they made it look like the Cardassians had succeeded in that, when in reality they gave them the wrong location.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So that's why they did that.
Right. So, yeah, the Cardassians are off on a goose chase, whereas the Klingons and the Enterprise are still in league together, as they've been kind of upfront and honest with each other and not tried to undermine each other. And so they're off to the Ulveran system, which is where the missing piece of DNA should be, according to the computer calculations. And it's a dead world, more or less. It's used to have an ocean, but now it's dried up. But there are maybe some lichens in a kind of dried rock pool. So they beam down there, the Enterprise, Picard, and Dr. Crusher, and the Klingon. But then the Cardassians appear almost straight away. It's not explained how they would know. Maybe they just planted a tracker on the Enterprise or something. But then also the Romulans appear too. So the Romulans have been not part of this episode until this point, but they've been in the background monitoring what's going on. And they kind of track down where the lichens are. They want to get the DNA, but now they're in a kind of Mexican standoff situation where the Cardassians don't want anyone to have it. The Romulans don't want anyone else to have it. The Klingons don't want anyone else to have it, and they're threatening kind of mutually assured destruction of the final piece unless each one gets their own way. But while this is going on, Picard realizes, well, there might be fossil DNA around, so let's just go for that, which is quite smart. And this is in the days when ancient DNA wasn't really a thing. 1993 is very much the very early days of ancient DNA, so that's pretty cool. And so while everyone's occupied threatening each other, they kind of pick up a tiny bit of dirt from the ground, put it on their tricorder, and use that to activate the algorithm. So now they have all the pieces, and it sets to working. And what it does is it changes the tricorder to become a like mini projector, and it projects a recorded hologram off their progenitors, I think they're called, which are these humanoid people who somehow speak intergalactic English, which is great. I don't know if they have an equivalent of the Babelfish in Star Trek, or how it is that everyone understands each other. Anyway, it's technology which is indistinguishable from magic. And this progenitor explains that they were the first civilization. They went exploring into space and didn't find any other civilizations. They were alone. And they couldn't really rest easy with this knowledge, so they decided to seed planets with their own DNA, but in a special way that included the fragments of this algorithm, so that hopefully in the future these different species would come together and work as a brotherhood, as a fraternity, and as a kind of legacy of these original progenitors, which is a really neat and cool idea. And it explains so much. I mean, it's really clever. Star Trek has always been about meeting aliens who have slightly different eyebrows or have funny bumps on their head, or things that could be knocked up by a props department in a couple of hours. And this perfectly explains why that is the case, because they all descend from one humanoid-like creature. It's fantastic, really. But there's also a nice setup that this progenitor hologram is saying, we hope that our legacy would be these new intelligent species that would have a part of us, and that we would see that there's a universal commonality between intelligent bipeds, and that we should all work together. And this is sort of neatly juxtaposed with the fact that the Cardassians are threatening to kill the Klingons and the Romulans are threatening to kill the Cardassians and the Klingons are threatening to kill everybody, and the humans are kind of stuck in the middle as well, trying to be...
The Klingons are threatening to kill the hologram if it wasn't already dead.
Absolutely, yeah. Nothing a Klingon likes better than killing. So that's a kind of a really interesting kind of final juxtaposition. And so they kind of leave, go back to the Enterprise. They kind of talk it over, Picard and Crusher, and about how the progenitors have kind of their idea hasn't reached fruition. There isn't a universal fraternity of intelligent species, but there could be one day. And then there's a nice final sign off from the Romulans who hail the Enterprise and say they're going to go off, and that perhaps one day they could be friends. So there's the seed has been planted thanks to this episode that maybe one day everyone can live in harmony. So yeah, that's pretty much, I think, what happens. Not much chasing, really. An awful lot of exposition, but it wouldn't be Star Trek without that.
So, what do we have to nitpick in this episode?
Well,
well, I'm sure you have a lot to say about DNA, so maybe let's start with the archaeology and the artifact at the beginning and get that out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, the professor is supposed to be the best archaeologist in the Federation, but here he is, going on illegal digs in his world of expertise and just giving away artifacts to ex-pupils. I mean, that seems pretty wrong.
Yeah, seems very like at the beginning of archaeology, the antiquarianism stuff, right?
Yeah.
But if we think about the Star Trek universe, I mean, it is sort of like colonialism 2.0, right? Where, I mean, they seem to be portraying what they're doing as ethical, but, I mean, anybody who's a fan of the show can, like, pick apart that argument pretty easily. There's a lot of weird colonial stuff that's, portrayed as them being the good guys, but still uncomfortable. So, I mean, they're still just exploring new planets and digging up stuff. So it kind of is like the Wild West of space archaeology in a way, right? And I don't know what the actual Federation's laws are about archaeological artifacts. Maybe it's perfectly legal to sell them in this universe, right? It would be hard to imagine that's the case, but
it seems weird that in a universe with what do they have, those replicators that they can make anything, from Earl Grey tea to a ham sandwich, whatever, that there would still be a trade in antiquities. That the idea of Star Trek is a kind of post-scarcity society where nobody has to kind of struggle for anything because they've solved problems of energy production, they've solved problems of food production. What is the point of digging up an artifact on a planet and giving it to somebody when you could just ask the replicator to make one, which would be a perfect copy?
Well, maybe there's some value in the authenticity of it, right? So something that's not been made.
Absolutely, and that I guess that's something that comes up in kind of conversations today about, authenticity. And I'm quite happy to have a replica of a Cycladian statue, but other people would prefer to have the real one, even though they're essentially indistinguishable. Same with, I guess, with fossils as well. It's, I think, it's an ethical question, one which the right answer is that you should be happy with copies, because that they don't have any kind of stratigraphical or evidential value.
The real ones belong in a museum, damn it.
Exactly. Indiana Plump.
Indiana Plump is under my desk right now.
But I'm sort of surprised that, Picard should have said something like that. At no point does he, aver or have any kind of hesitation about accepting this gift of a priceless, undocumented, uncatalogued artifact. And Picard's supposed to be the good guy. He should have the highest ethical standards, and he just is like, "Oh, that's cool. I've always wanted one of these. I'll put it in my room, and no one will ever see it or publish it."
It does make an appearance in a couple of later episodes, sort of briefly, so he does hang on to it for a while. Okay. But yeah, it's kind of strange and disappointing that that's just the way it is. It's just, it's okay to give away or sell artifacts, it seems, in this universe.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's the people who are writing, just maybe growing up on Indiana Jones, they thought that it was more like that.
Yeah, I mean, the 90s aren't all that long ago, I have to say. But yeah, there were definitely rules about artifact acquisition even back then.
Yeah, but would the general person know that though, or care?
Yeah, I guess.
I also find it funny that this, famous archaeologist, super good and everything, is coming back to somebody who, like a student who left after his bachelor's or didn't even get his bachelor's and then just left and begging him to take part. Like it's so funny
Yeah.
that like Picard is supposed to be so special.
The reason he explains that is that he's not a young man anymore, so he needs some like young muscles. So he went to get his student, who is now like in his like 40s or 50s, to be his like bodyguard.
Yeah.
Why hasn't he gotten more students? Something's gone wrong in his career. It's very shady.
For sure.
And then he's such a jerk about Captain. And then I found it really funny too that they're supposed to have this really, I know we're not talking about archaeology now, but they're supposed to have this really close bond, so close that he's come back for him and everything. And then he's like, shall I call you Captain now? And then he's like, instead of being like, no, call me Jean, he's like, Mr. is fine.
Yeah. Weird.
Funny.
We could talk about the actual artifact itself, which they call Naiskos, which is a real thing from antiquity. Does anybody know anything about that?
The Niskos disc, is that what you think it's kind of referencing?
Well, no, I don't know what that is. Tell me what that is.
I don't know. It's just something that sounds. Maybe I'm confusing it with something else.
Well, while you look that up, I can tell you. I mean, I had to look this up because this is all classical archaeology, which, as we've said many times, none of us really have any experience with. But Naiskos is. I'll just read you straight from Wikipedia. It's a small temple in classical order with columns or pillars and a pediment, which doesn't really help me understand it at all. The pictures of them, that's what it looks like. It's like a little squarish sculpture carved out of stone, usually it looks like, that has like pillars and like a roof, like an ancient Greek temple or something. And they usually have like a figurine of a person inside them. And they look pretty small, and like maybe it talks about them being used as funeral architecture, so maybe they're like grave markers or something like that.
All right.
It's kind of unclear to me exactly what they are, other than like maybe they're like gravestones, which is kind of different from the thing we see in the show because it is ceramic and it opens up and it has things inside, and it's not obviously supposed to be a grave marker or anything like that. So I'm not exactly sure what the connection is with the word there. But that was my assumption from the actual word that they're using.
Right. Well, what I'm getting confused with is the Phaistos disc. Not Naistos, but Phaistos, which is a disc of clay from Crete, which has a kind of unknown script on it, which has been stamped into it. And is kind of one of those kind of archaeological conundrums that people talk about all the time.
We could talk about the ceramic and like the structure, the composition of the thing itself, because that is a thing that archaeologists would study a lot. Like you would find lots of things made out of ceramics, and you would be looking at the design elements, just like he's doing, to try and tie it down to a certain cultural period.
Mm-hmm.
Have any of you been getting into like the modern pottery craze, watching the pottery throwdown or anything like that?
No, I wanted to take classes, but it's too expensive here.
Yeah.
The only kind of exposure I've had to that is seeing that Seth Rogen has made his own line of pottery ashtrays.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which seemed to sell for quite a lot.
Oh, yeah. So my girlfriend has been getting into pottery. She started taking lessons a little over a year ago and like went in like hard. She bought a wheel already. So our house is just full. Everything we have is now handmade.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Oh, wow. That's great. I was admiring that cup earlier, actually. That's nice.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. She's getting really good. Like I love this cup. This is a really
cool.
nice cup.
Yeah, that looks like one of those cups you pay $50 for at a farmer's market.
Yeah, if you want to pay $50 for a really nice cup or a bowl, go to, I should know her Instagram account. It's a pottery by Aurora or something like that. I don't know. There's a lot
I'm
of
going there right now.
there's a lot of Auroras doing pottery on Instagram, so I should have. I'll put the actual account in the show notes. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that I've got a lot of experience with pottery in the last year. Our house is full of pottery that's half made. I've even learned how to do it myself.
Cool.
And so there's a thing about people who do pottery where once you get doing pottery, every time you pick up a mug, the first thing you do is you look at the bottom to see if there's a maker's mark on it or something. So we were looking, I watched the episode with her, and we were looking at this sculpture and looking at all the design elements, and he describes it pretty briefly. He says, when he's describing the design elements, he says green polychrome over the eyes. And so we were looking at the thing, and it looks like it's some sort of a red clay with some sort of glaze that's sort of like brushed off over the features, right? So you can sort of see the clay through the glaze in some places. But polychrome just means many colors. And so when you talk about polychrome in pottery, it usually means that you're using 3 or more different colors of glaze or underglaze on it. And this artifact only has seemingly one color of glaze. And also he said green polychrome over the eyes. There's not really any green on it at all, but not particularly on the eyes. The eyes don't have a different color of glaze than the rest of it does. He also says that the eyes are closed, but the eyes are pretty stylized, so I'm not even sure how you would tell if the eyes were open or closed on it. So I don't know. That's my commentary on the pottery so far.
See, I would describe that as green. I saw it as like a gray green.
Yeah, there's sort of a greeny tinge to it, but like not distinctly green over the eyes relative to the rest of it, right? He said green polychrome over the eyes.
You know, colors, names are weird. Like people, like in dog breeding, blue is kind of gray, and all these kind of things. Maybe it's so kind of specialized, it has its own kind of terminology. Could be.
The one thing I was thinking was that it could refer to the glaze, because the glaze was sort of multidimensional. There's more. It wasn't just a flat color, so he could be referring to the glaze itself as being polychrome with green in it.
I think I found Aurora's Instagram. Does she have a Baba Yaga hoodie?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I've got it then. And I think I spotted your mug as well, so that's really cool. There's some amazing stuff on there. That's really cool.
Yeah, she's just getting to the level where she's getting ready to sell it. So if anybody's interested in buying some pottery, take a look at that, and you could have one of the first things that she sells.
It would be slightly disappointing if Aurora gets more sales of her merc from a plug on our podcast that we do our podcast merc. But hey ho.
So buy a pottery by Aurora, and we'll send you a Screens of the Stone Age t-shirt in it. Buy a Screens of the Stone Age t-shirt, and I'll send you a coffee cup.
Are we selling our shirts?
No, I mean, people want to buy them, sure. In the last episode, we said we were going to give them away for free indefinitely, and all you have to do is point out a mistake. And I've been intentionally not correcting mistakes this episode. So.
We've been saying mistakes?
Only about the Canadian road system.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, how about we could talk about micropaleontology and environmental DNA and ancient DNA, because there's a few things. He uses the term micropaleontology early in the episode, and then that sort of ties back to the end where he realizes he can get microscopic fossilized DNA out of the sediment. And like you said, ancient DNA was really in its infancy in the early 90s. Environmental DNA
wasn't a thing then.
Yeah, I don't know when environmental DNA started, but like certainly it's only been the last 5 years that we've been able to do that sort of with regularity in archaeology, right?
Yeah, I think environmental DNA probably late 90s, early 2000s. Certainly that's the first kind of papers I remember reading about with DNA from kind of ice cores to start with, going back quite far, looking at getting DNA, I guess, from microfossils in the sediment cores that they were getting out. So yeah, like a lot of Star Trek, ahead of its time in some ways.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sure if I had been older in 1993 and watched this episode live, I would have probably said, that's bullshit. That doesn't make any sense.
And I guess, it's interesting that they get so much right, but then, this guy's an archaeologist, but he's talking about micropaleontology, which is a totally different field.
Mm-hmm.
But then I guess in that universe where you may have, would it even be archaeology if you're looking at alien civilizations? Or would it have to have a different name? Because you're not looking at humans, you're looking at aliens, so kind of xenoarchaeology or something. But then, yes, then maybe there's more overlap because, with archaeology here, you're talking about the last kind of 50 to 100,000 years, probably, within the time frame of the appearance of modern Homo sapiens. But if you're looking at cultures on other planets, which may have been around for much longer or appeared much earlier than humans did, then maybe micropaleontology would become an accepted part of that, where you have to date cultures from millions of years back or something.
Mm-hmm. The concept of like what archaeology actually means is pretty interesting because like archaeology, we can define it as the reconstruction and interpretation of the past from material culture, which is the remains of cultural activity that preserve.
But then that doesn't include bioarchaeology.
Well, I guess so, yeah. But I mean, we'll put that aside for now. But like, it's implicit in archaeology that it's human, but because humans are the only ones with a cultural record, except that now on Earth, we are discovering that other animals also have cultural records. Like we're finding lots of evidence of stone tool use by different primates. And so does that mean that, we can extrapolate this to aliens as well. Does the study of a cultural record, is that archaeology, or is only the study of the human cultural record archaeology, and then every other species cultural record is going to need its own unique name? But like just on Earth today, is the study of the capuchin monkey archaeological record, is that archaeology of capuchin monkeys, or is that something different and archaeology is only humans?
I think that's a discussion we're going to have once people start studying that.
Yeah.
I think in the Star Trek universe, I could see it being just termed archaeology, like for the cultural record across all, because at that point you're probably going to do cross-planetary comparisons and such, right? So if you split it up into different disciplines for every culture or every planet that you're looking at, it's going to be, plus there's going to be multiple cultures within that planet, and it's going to be that whole, it would get ridiculous. And I think, and eventually it would come under an umbrella term anyways, as people started to collaborate. So I think it would be archaeology.
Yeah, and I guess, the kind of premise of this episode is that everyone's has a similar founding. So we're
exactly.
not...
Everybody is a hominin, right? So I guess it would be anthropology too, right? So then would it be the study of anthropology? Sorry, I have a very talkative new foster rescue.
Yeah.
Well, Ross, what can you tell us about just the general language about DNA and the general use of DNA in this episode?
It's definitely it's not hideously off the mark. Certainly, the idea of messages in DNA is something that's been looked at. So DNA as a storage medium has been investigated, and people have actually sort of translated messages into DNA and then put it into bacteria, let that bacteria kind of live for a bit, and then try and kind of decode it again to check that it has sort of message fidelity. But I guess the problem with this premise is that there is no kind of bit of DNA that would not change. I mean, that's just the nature of evolution, is that every bit of DNA is subject to natural selection. So it's certainly something that was there right from the beginning. It wouldn't not change. So even if it was non-functional, then it would be subject to random mutations, and if it was functional, then it would be prone to selection. So as a kind of storage medium for keeping a message going over 4 billion years, it's not a great one because mutation is the essence of evolution. But the progenitors in their holograms say that they had the scientists kind of monkey around with it to make sure that it would last. So yeah, who knows?
But I mean, even the idea, it was a really nice cap off to the episode, and it was a lovely idea, but it doesn't make sense because they said that they went and they put DNA in planets that could sustain life. So, right? So they started life forms and they pushed them into the direction of hominids. And so that whole idea that you have, again, linear evolution from whatever was started, throw in some hominin DNA, and then it's going to eventually evolve into a unique hominin species.
Yeah, exactly. You get into the problem of sort of this teleological approach, which has intelligence and hominids as being the end point of kind of a directed evolution. And if you were to rewind the sort of tape of life and altered things even slightly, then you get a totally different end product, because it's a lot of it has to do with chance, and mutations are the ultimate kind of random chance. So yeah, I mean, it is a cool idea.
It was a nice story, but it's not.
I don't know if they said it specifically in the episode, but my understanding was that they must have put some sort of piece of code into the DNA to like direct the evolution of itself. Did you guys get that understanding out of it?
I mean, yes, I think that's what they were saying, that their scientists could have essentially made it so that they would produce something that looked a bit like the progenitors on all these different planets.
How many generations?
After 4 billion years and virtually infinite different lineages leading to very different species, one of them eventually becomes the progenitors.
And other sort of stuff. So they're using sedimental ancient DNA essentially for their final piece of the puzzle when they beam down to the last planet and get some kind of microfossil DNA from the dried up ocean bed. I mean, that's an idea that was way ahead of its time for the early 90s. And it's more or less right. People do that now. There's been some great papers out where they've looked at sedimentary DNA from places like zoos just to see if they could get an estimate of what animals and what their frequency was based on the kind of DNA content of the soil that they're walking over, looking at kind of bacterial populations in glaciers, using environmental DNA as a tracking device. So there was a paper recently where you don't have to have soil, you can use water as well. So they did environmental DNA studies of Loch Ness, looking for monsters. I mean, that obviously, but also tracking things like salmon numbers and eel populations and invertebrates and things like that. Things that are possibly rare and hard to study at the macro level. But yeah, it's a burgeoning field which has lots of really cool implications. I was involved with a study a while back where they were looking at environmental DNA, but taken from leeches. So taken from bloodsuckers in the rainforest, where obviously tracking and monitoring of rare species is very difficult. But if you get a few leeches, whiz them up in a blender, and then extract the DNA from their gut contents, you can see what they've been feeding on, and use that as a way of monitoring population sizes and distribution and things. So yeah, it's cool.
Poor leeches.
Oh, you're such a bleeding heart, Kim. I mean, is that the next step? Kim's home for abandoned leeches. Yeah. So yeah, sedimentary DNA. I have some friends that work in that, and it's really cool, very cool. But I think they'd struggle to get several million-year-old DNA from a bit of sand, and particularly to get it done as fast as they do it in Star Trek, where as soon as it's in the bottle and just placed on the tricorder, they get the answer straight away. That would be nice. But
well, I thought it was the fossilized lichen that they got it from, not the sand.
I think wasn't that what the Cardassians and the Klingons and the Romulans were fighting over? They found the lichen on the rock, and that's the only site, and they were going to destroy it. And then Picard and Crusher thought
they found some more.
No, Picard and Crusher were just looking at the kind of fossil stuff on the dried up seafloor, and that's where they got the DNA from.
I enjoyed how smooth Picard was through everything. Like nothing phased him. Is he like that in all the episodes?
He's such a great
Yeah.
actor. I mean, you forget just how good he is in this role. Just the gravitas that he brings to it, and the acting that he does is just so good.
I believe he took the role because he didn't expect the show to last more than one season, and he's like, "I'll be a paycheck for a year." And I think we're really lucky that we got him in this role for so long, because he really shouldn't have been on a show like this, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe the show is what it is partly because they've got him.
I think so. Yeah, he really is like the kind of focal point. And if the character of Picard didn't work, then the show would have been rubbish.
And big boots to fill with the previous Star Wars, right? Or Star Trek. Sorry. Oh my God. I did it. An hour in and I did it.
Having to replace Darth Vader. It's just...
Yeah. And Dumbledore.
But interesting to see, talking about sci-fi connections, the writer of this episode, Roland D. Moore, he was also the main writer on Battlestar Galactica, which was also a fantastic reboot series, which I really, really enjoyed and watched every episode of when it came out in the late 2000s.
Yeah, that was like the first binging show for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Before that, I remember watching that like in a relatively short amount of time, like a week or so. And up to that point, you'd never watch an entire series in a week. That was crazy. But now I do that every weekend, pretty much.
Yeah.
And also, again, sort of revisit in Battlestar Galactica, spoiler alert, but as revisit sort of similar themes to this episode. So, like, you've seen them, you watched them all in a week, Josh. So, at the end where it turns out that Earth is seeded by the folks from Battlestar Galactica, that kind of is an echo of what goes on in this episode, really.
Yeah. There's one little thing that struck me when Picard is talking to his professor, and he makes a reference to a question that he got wrong on the exam way back, and he said that he's had some time to remember the answer at this point. I have that experience myself from one of my undergrad osteology exam, which is a practical exam. There's only one question I got wrong, and I'll never forget the question I got wrong. I don't remember any of the other questions, but the one I got wrong is the one I'll never forget, right?
Isn't that just human nature? I mean, it's one of the curses of being human, is that it's always your mistakes that last with you for a lifetime, and not your successes. I was trying to see if there was any link between the professor being called Galen and Galen, the kind of father of medicine, but I couldn't really see one.
I was wondering, one of the planets they go to is Indri 8, and an Indri is a type of lemur, and I was wondering if that meant anything, but I don't know. Kim has lost her connection, so we're going to wrap up the episode without her. One of the things about this episode that we see in a lot of the movies that we've watched is this sort of pessimistic view of humans, or in this case, in humans and all of our humanoid relatives in the universe, that there was some sort of plan for us to be noble and peaceful and cooperative, but actually we're inevitably squabbling and fighting, and there is the optimistic turn right at the end to show that maybe there is some hope, but we see that sort of thing in a lot of the movies we've seen, hey?
Yeah, and I think that's what's really nice about the Star Trek universe, is that it's an optimistic one, where the problems that face our modern societies are overcome. And unlike a lot of sci-fi today, which is set in dystopias, Star Trek is sort of the closest we have to a sort of cinematic utopia, where things work and where our kind of noblest aspirations are realized. And I think it's really missing in the kind of TV and film landscape of today is the sort of hope that Star Trek was so good at. Not preachy, but just, wouldn't it be nice if we just all got along? That kind of sentiment is missing in a lot of places.
So what do we think about this episode in the end?
Good. Yeah, really good. I think it does what it's sets out to do really well. Fantastic acting from everyone, interesting characters, and a really cool premise. One that, it takes the idea of ancient aliens, which can be racist and derogatory trope, but actually makes it good and hopeful, which is quite a tricky thing to pull off.
Mm-hmm. I guess it'd be easier in 1993 before the ancient aliens phenomenon became what it is today.
Yeah, I mean, it's still in a kind of background of von Daniken and Velikovsky and the sort of grand old masters of that nonsense.
Yeah. This episode has 8 out of 10 on IMDb, which is, I think that puts it among the top Star Trek Next Generation episodes.
Yeah.
Definitely among the top of the movies that we've watched in terms of its IMDb ratings.
Yeah, for sure. Way, way above.
I've been saving this one for a while because I knew I wanted to do this one, but there's a few more episodes of The Next Generation, and I think also of Deep Space Nine that have archaeologists in them or some sort of archaeological story. So maybe we'll do some more Next Generation or Deep Space Nine in the future.
Yeah, I'd be up for that.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.